Hi, guys. Well, one sec. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights for three true scary phone call stories.
Never give clingy people your phone number. Edited multiple times for formatting because I'm horrible at this. Even in all, I finally caved after months of reading these stories to contribute one of my very own. I may end up posting more as I've had quite an interesting life, but a story I just read made me think that this one fits the bill and isn't liable to screw me up in the recollecting process. For the record and whatnot, I'm a 26-year-old guy living with one of his best friends and my boyfriend of 6 years, who I'll call Lucas. A few years ago, I found a story online that hit me like not many of them do. It was a very long fictional story, and it was written incredibly brutally well. If you're a fan of or familiar with Poppy Z. Bright's writing and romance style, it was like that, and I absolutely fell in love with it, particularly the author's writing style. I'm keeping this vague because this guy is some kind of well known, at least in certain parts of the internet, and despite all of this, I still have mixed feelings towards him. We'll get to that though. This story stuck on me, and I bookmarked it, knowing I want to read it again eventually. About a half a year passed, give or take, and in that time, the computer I'd saved it on shit the bed, so when out of nowhere I got thinking on that story again, wanting to reread it, I had to hunt it down all over again. I remember that bits of it had been on DeviantArt, and I started there, figuring the scraps and teaser bits might lead to the full story. I found the author's website instead, which had links to actually buy the damn thing, which made my day. I managed to re-find the story online, wishlist it, the physical copy, then found that the author, who I'll refer to as Sam from here on out, had several social media links up. One of them was Tumblr, which I was sadly a pretty avid user of at the time. I shot him an anonymous message, as was my habit at the time, lauding his wonderful writing and lauding the impact it had had on me, following him on the site immediately after. Somewhere around this point, I got the guts up to write to him personally, and despite how silly it sounds, and felt at the time even, I was almost ecstatic when he responded. We started emailing back and forth due to Tumblr's tiny word limit, and eventually, the waiting time led quick enough to chat on Yahoo Messenger. Around this point, I was having a lot of emotional issues. I've dealt with severe depression and anxiety for more than half of my life. If I ever post some of my other experiences, a lot of that will make sense, and it was an awesome distraction. He was a huge Stephen King fan, as am I, and we bonded on that right off the bat. From the first night we talked, we were sharing music preferences, sending little bundles of songs we thought the other might like. It was nice, and it was a pleasant surprise, since the songs he suggested, I actually did wind up liking. Things changed, and sometimes I kick myself for not seeing it coming, because he wasn't exactly opaque about his oddities, but I blame a lot of it on how much respect I built towards this man, on mostly his writing capacities. We talked a lot. He started sending me videos, mostly everything and anything of Roz Williams. Sam was obsessed with Roz, and obsessed with hating Valor Cand, the singer who took over after Roz committed suicide. I never know much about Roz's music or his ideas, and I'll totally confess that I was intrigued after hearing a bit of it. I could sympathize with Sam's rage too. Here was this brilliant artist who just hit his breaking point and given it to it, and his legacy was being eradicated by this stupid guy named Valor. It got ridiculous though, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Sam was obsessed with gore. I went through a heavy guru chant phase when I was younger, so it didn't really faze me at first, but after a while it was just really suffocating, unnecessary, and way over the goddamn top perverse. Don't get me wrong, he was never offensive and never made a single uncomfortable advance towards me. The furthest it gone at this point was him telling me I was lovely and stop thinking poorly of myself, which I honestly appreciated and still do. Just constant commentary about his boys and what he wanted to do to them. Everything was a fetish to this man. Medical, absolutely. Intestines, totally. Musicians he respected on their knees vomiting and having breakdowns? Fuck yeah. It was like there were no borders, no off limits, an absolute lack of real respect because everything had to be perverse, everything had to be fappable. It was annoying, but not really disconcerting, until he started telling me about his relationships. Here, I actually felt a little bit guilty, but hell, I'm in this far. He insisted that he was in a romantic relationship with 2 ghosts, his 2 pet ghost boys. I'm a believer in the paranormal, and I've seen some crazy, strange shit in my life, but still, I just couldn't take it. I never said it to his face, and technically, I'm not calling it outright impossible, but it was just way too goddamn much. Way too goddamn much. He'd tell me about visiting Jeffrey Dahmer on the other side and partying with him, refer to everyone that wasn't him or someone he approved of as morals or humans, like a 12-year-old kid hitting their Anne Rice years. Just gah. So many things. Somewhere in the mess, he told me that he had multiples, but they weren't multiples. Some weren't even human, but they were more like ghosts. I don't know, it's just kind of piled up all together. It started getting way worse, mostly with him freaking out unexplicitly about going off about they and them, or saying it was the XUL, but I don't even have the patience to get into that clusterfuck. And at some point much earlier, it was in a moment of utter idiocy that I'd given him my boyfriend's phone number. My phone at the time was out of commission, and Lucas's phone was the only one really solidly working in the house, and he'd offered numerous times for me to call or text this guy when our internet crapped out. We texted a few times, and once or twice, Lucas and him would trade messages. The first night I talked to him on Skype face-to-face, it'd been both Lucas and I because I'm desperately awkward with Skype for some reason. He started texting constantly, 5 a.m., 3 a.m., 11 p.m., just really unnecessary hours. I don't work a 9-to-5 job because of my previously mentioned issues, but Lucas does, and just because I don't sleep for days on end doesn't mean that he doesn't as well. This guy just did not seem to get that. He'd get cranky when I signed out to make dinner, signed off to go to sleep, signed off to try and spend time with my boyfriend. It started to feel like I was his only friend, and I began to first seriously suspect that, and then later completely believe it. Somewhere in the realm of 4 to 5 months of us talking, he'd been getting much worse, talking about his dead boys incessantly when he wasn't spamming my inbox with either videos, songs, or pictures of Roz, complete with paragraphs of fanatic gibbering. When it just got fucked up, downright completely fucked up. I couldn't check my fucking email without him seeing me as online and hitting me up immediately with 4 to 5 messages. I stopped going online for days on end, and when I came back, he was like a cat that hadn't been fed in fucking weeks, just up my ass and suffocating. I'm a musician, and an acquaintance of mine invited me out of the blue to a casual open mic night. I was freaking out, trying to decide whether or not I should go, and texted him to get input. He got excited and told me something along the lines of, "If you think you can, I think you definitely should." So that was it. Him, Lucas, and another friend all saying go for it, and I caved. When I told him it was on, he seemed pretty happy for me and told me to tell him all about it afterwards when I got back. Me and Lucas walked down there, I played a few songs, and it went amazingly well. I was absolutely buzzed for hours afterwards, as it'd been the first time I played any kind of live in almost 10 years, and it went so good. Later that night, at around 10ish I think, I texted him, telling him how good it'd gone. He was incredibly bitchy in response, and immediately sounded like the kind of SO or spouse that'll push you to go have fun or do something you want for the express purposes of attempting to guilt or berate you about it later. That got me irritated, but I wasn't entirely too pleased to care much, so I tried to drop the conversation. He apologized at some point, asked to call me, and I accepted. What followed was about 3 hours on and off of him either drunk or borderline time travel excess, having a full psychotic break, or drugged out to the point where even Keith Richards would be concerned. He started talking in different tones, different voices, talking about himself in third person. Like I mentioned earlier, he supposedly had some kind of alters that he would later begin sending me messages as, designating the personality shifts, of course, by changing the colors and fonts. I'm not gonna count that out completely, but holy shit, right? He started saying incredibly strange things when he wasn't sobbing so hard and the sound cut off, one of which still freaks me out to this day. He'd be mid-sentence, crying and screaming about, "They did this to him. I've seen him, and it's killing him, and they did it." And then clears his throat, calmly apologizes, and asks me how the open mic thing went. It was during one of these quiet bits where he started talking in one of the creepiest fucking voices I've ever heard, though I still can't explain why it shook me up so bad. I don't remember how it went exactly, but I've still got the gist of it. I was in the middle of trying to explain how the thing went, and he cuts off in this weirdly soggy, gravely voice that I could hear the crazy smile in. "They're not like you, you know. You didn't belong there with those things." I stop, ask him to repeat or at least clarify, and he just essentially rephrases it, saying something like, "You felt as out of place as you were, and they knew it. They all knew it." Here's the odd thing. What Sam was saying was completely right, and it was right to the point where I actually got kind of freaked out. How did he know this? How was he so accurate? Fuck, it sounds so stupid right now, but it terrified me. He starts asking me in the same god-awful voice, "How drained do you feel right now? How much of you did they steal?" And I'm just noping so fucking hard, it sounds downright ridiculous, sitting here and writing out to strangers, but I lived it and it was just, gah, yeah. This continues for a few minutes until I have to ask him to repeat himself again, and he breaks back into screaming at me at how I better know who he's talking about now, and intermittently asking me how could anyone not love Roz. I mean, how dare they? He also hung up on me a handful of times, ending with "fuck this once" and "fuck you the next." When we actually talked the following morning, he put it on him being wasted as fuck. A few months later, he called me again, around 5 in the fucking morning, and talked for 4 goddamn hours about Roz and how he felt that the world was prejudiced for not acknowledging his dead boys. Another time around that point, he called me again, absolutely livid because his ex, who had reportedly been a semi-well-known model, had the audacity to mention Roz's name. That's not much of a conclusion to this story, and if you stuck with me this far, I appreciate it. The crazier he got, the less we actually had any kind of conversation, and thus the less I talked to him. I spent less time online, stayed much more neutral in response instead of humoring him, etc., and it luckily just kind of faded. There's been a few months now, like the time he spammed my email with requests to jump on board some mass reporting spree he was doing on Tumblr because someone's opinion was hate speech to him, and when his car was stolen, and he sent me a 15-message paragraph written almost exclusively from a we and our perspective. I mean, while I appreciate the occasional what the fuck in my inbox, and wish the guy some kind of sanity or peace, I mean, let's not meet again, Sam, and for fuck's sakes, let's never meet in person. On the phone with Santa Claus. Hi guys, I'm reading here since a couple months ago, but I've actually never posted anything. So this occurred when I was about 7 years old, in 1994. I was living in a big house in Germany my parents owned, together with my older brother and sister, as well as our small dog and my grandparents. To understand my fear in this situation, you have to know that my grandparents were on vacation and that my parents were out shopping with my brother. My sister was supposed to stay with me, but she was meeting with a friend and took the dog with her. I had no problem with that, since being alone and able to watch whatever I wanted on TV was not a common thing for me. Also, I was never easily scared up to this point. It was around the beginning of December, so at around 6 p.m. it was already dark outside. Also, what you need to know for this story is, in Germany, Santa Claus is not called Santa Claus, but Weihnachtsmann, which translates to Christmas man, but it's still the same fat dude in red and white coat. I was sitting in our living room, watching The Simpsons, which I had just discovered this year. Suddenly, the phone was ringing, and of course, since I loved talking on the phone as a kid, I picked it up. "This is my name. Who is this?" I said in my high-pitched kid's voice. "Oh, is your daddy home?" said the very deep, raspy voice on the other end of the line. "No, he's not here at the moment," I replied, being my naive, polite self. "Okay, so could I speak to your mom then?" "She's not home either." "Well, who is home that I can talk to other than you?" he asked. "Nobody, I'm alone," I replied, now feeling a little uncomfortable, since it dawned on me that I was all alone in this big house with a strange guy on the phone. "So, who is this?" I asked, now a little shaky. "Oh, me? I'm the Christmas man," he claimed, now a little darker. "And since nobody is home with you, me and my friends can just walk into your house and take everything we want." At this point, my hair stood up on my entire body, and the freezing cold began running up and down my spine, creeping into my arms. I just slammed the phone on the cradle. I let down the blinds in every room on the first floor and locked the door, but I was still scared shitless. I didn't know what time anyone would come home, and I started feeling very worried for my family as well. Should they walk into some criminal gang robbing our house? Then the phone rang again. Hoping for my parents or anybody to call me, I ran back into the living room and picked it up. "Hello?" I stuttered. "Why did you hang up?" the cold voice said. "Who is this?" I asked again. "I told you I'm the Christmas man," he said. I was almost able to see his evil grin through the phone. "And now we're coming over." "I'll call the police," I yelled, panic taking control of me. Again, I slammed the phone down. I couldn't really get myself to call the cops, since I still hoped for this to be an evil joke. And the phone started ringing again. Silly me, I picked it up. "I'm calling the police right now," I yelled. At this point, he tried to explain to me that he was just joking around, and he was a colleague of my father's who happened to have the family name Weihnachtsmann, Christmas man, which even in Germany is a very weird name, one I never came across. When he was in mid-sentence, I heard the front door opening and my mother calling. "My parents are back, so you can talk to my father now," I said. I did really believe him to be a colleague of my father who made a bad joke, but when my father picked up the phone, there was no one there. Also, he never knew anyone by that last name, and nobody from his company tried to call him at all. I mean, him and mother never made a big deal out of it, but it still scares me today. So, Herr Weihnachtsmann, let's not meet. Creepy phone call. I'm the youngest of 5, my siblings being 5, 6, 7, and 8 years older than me. So there were times when my parents were out of the house and my siblings, 1 or more, were left to kind of watch me. I was 10 years old, and it's just me and my 16-year-old sister Dawn at the house. This took place in the summer of 1981. The phone rang and I answered it. The caller, who sounded very cheerful, immediately asked for my parents. by their first and last names. I remember thinking he sounded familiar, like maybe one of my dad's coworkers or something. Anyways, I told him that they weren't home, and he sounded genuinely sad about it. He told me that my parents had agreed to collect some items for him, bag them in brown grocery bags, and leave them on the porch. They actually used to do this with clothes and such for charities, and thus far, everything was making sense. After telling him alright, he then asked if I could write down the list of things he needed. I grabbed a small pad of paper and the pencil we kept by the phone and told him I could. He started out with a few normal items, I assume, since I don't remember what they were, and then he stops and asks me, "What's your favorite color?" Well, I was 10 and a girly girl, so I said purple, and he responded, "Oh, do you think that's a bit too much for a little girl's silk panties?" I kind of furrowed my brow, thinking it was a bit odd, but just answered, "No, I guess not." He told me to put it on the list. He then gave me a few more items and said, "Now this part is really important, okay? Are you ready?" I told him that I was, and he said, "I need 8 baby bottles of sperm." And as you can imagine, I was sitting there writing in my 10-year-old handwriting, and I get to the word sperm, and I'm like, there's just something not right about that word. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew it was not something someone should be asking a kid for, so I told him to wait a minute. I set the phone down and ran into Dawn's room. She was lying on her bed, reading a magazine, and I told her what he said. She literally leaped off the bed, shouting "what?" and ran into the den. She grabbed the phone and was shouting "hello, hello" over and over. Of course, the creep had hung up. When my parents got home, I told them what happened and showed them the list. They were sufficiently creeped out, but this was before caller ID and other such tools. I told them his voice sounded familiar enough that I heard it, I'd recognize it, and that I thought he might work with my dad or something. Other than that, there was not much else to do. At Christmas, Mom and I were decorating the tree and the phone rang. I was standing right by it, so I turned and picked it up. It was the same man, and he just said, "Merry Christmas." Unfortunately, I panicked and slammed the phone down. I still wish I would have calmly handed it to my mom, because she might have recognized who it was, and my dad would have been happy to take care of the situation. I didn't though, and as far as I know, he never called back again. I will never forget that happening to me, and now, all these years later, I still think I would recognize his voice, and while I don't actually want to meet him, as an adult, I like to punch him in the face.